So, hello, I'm Elizabeth Ross, and I am one of the producers of Education Now. I'm also a senior writer and editor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and just want to welcome you to today's webinar on human schools and deeper learning. Just so you know, we would love to hear your questions for our panel. You can use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and that's where you'll also find closed caption access. And we have lots to get to today with our guests, so I'd like to welcome everyone. We have Neema Avashia. She's a longtime middle school teacher and currently an ethnic studies coach in the Boston Public Schools. She previously taught civics. We have Joel Mehta, professor of education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and Kimberly Wynne is assistant superintendent of the Farmington Public Schools in Connecticut. And so let's welcome Neema, Joel, and Kimberly. Welcome to all of you.
For having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to have you. So let's get started with Joel. I'd love to ask you, Joel, I have a question. You've written about folks needing to move towards a new grammar of schooling. And the problem you said it isn't the people inside schools, but the structure that they're working within. And I wonder if you could just explain that a little bit more about what you mean about this structure, that's the problem.
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks for putting this together. So the grammar of schooling, which is an idea that comes from Stanford scholars David Tyack and Larry Cuban, is the sort of the basic assumptions and structures that we just assume have to be part of schooling. So, for example, the idea that kids should be separated by grades, the idea that subjects should be separated and you should do 45 minutes of math and 45 minutes of science and so on and so forth. The idea that kids should be sorted by perceived ability. All of these are the idea that there should be a physical place that people go to from 8 to 3, from August to June. All of those are human choices, and we could choose otherwise. So if you look at Montessori schools, for example, they blend students across different age groupings, and they use that blending. You'll see a 6-year-old teaching a 3-year-old how to sew or build blocks or something. So they really take advantage of peer learning in a way that our 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th don't. Or separating the school from the world. We ship textbooks in shrink wrap and tell teachers to move through them at a certain rate. And then we wonder why the students are disengaged or uninterested in their learning. Whereas, babies come out of the womb interested in everything. So we took people who were kind of naturally curious and we gradually kind of domesticated that through our structures. And so I guess what I've been writing about and what Neema and Kimberly have been bringing into being is the idea that schools could be more connected with the world, more connected with students and adults of different ages. Subjects could be more connected to one another. Knowledge is basically like one huge web with lots of interconnections. It's not a thing where it's packaged into lots of discrete subjects. So why not invite students onto that web?
Mm-hmm. And Neema, I know you've sort of run up against this structure, as it were, at times in your experiences. You've been a teacher for a very long time. But what are sort of the challenges that you've found, as an educator yourself, working within this structure, and how have you sort of managed some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think it's important to say in some ways a teacher in their classroom is profoundly capable of creating a classroom space that is human-centered, right? You can use flexible learning spaces to sort of get kids out of their desks. You can give students lots of choice in terms of what they learn and how they learn. You can build community with students and make space for their voices and really listening to one another and kind of moving your classroom forward through listening. All those things are possible. And educators are still working in a system that is in many ways designed without humanity at the center. I was a teacher, a middle school teacher for for close to 20 years, and around year 15, I ended up in the hospital with kidney stones. And I'm 100% convinced that those kidney stones were because I worked as a teacher, which means you don't get to use the bathroom, which means you don't drink water. Because drinking water would mean you'd have to leave your class, and there's no one to leave your class with, right? The very ways in which schools are structured don't allow for humans to meet basic functions. We ask students to eat their lunch in 25 minutes. We ask teachers to eat lunch and go to the bathroom in that 25 minutes, and there's one bathroom for all of the teachers to use. So all of the work that teachers do within the classroom to create these human-centered spaces, in some ways, it gets very much obstructed by the fact that the way we have structured schools is not with humans in mind. We've structured schools for efficiency or for cheapness, but not for actually making sure that all of the adults in the building, adults and young people, can have their humanity sort of recognized and held.
Absolutely. And Kimberly, I know your school district, Farmington Public Schools, it's part of this community of deeper learning districts that Joel co-founded and works with you. And you've mentioned before, I know that you're currently in the process of building a new high school. So with all of this in mind, that these structures can sometimes, create problems, I'm really curious to hear from you about how your students and your staff, what sort of input you've had from them about actually creating a school that will have this human focus and have them in mind and their interests and needs.
Yes, well, it's such a treat to be here with Joel. We have been a member of the deeper learning districts for only a year, and already we feel such a strong connection to the other districts in the network, eagerly working on the same kind of work. And that matters also, partners in the work. Yes, we are building a new high school, and there are many opportunities to be had there. You can see on my shelf behind me the hard hat that most assistant superintendents wouldn't have, but I'm frequently going up the hill to kind of look at the building, and being in the building is so inspirational to thinking about this moment in time when we can move to a better learning environment for our students, our teachers, our staff. Like just a couple examples, we've already moved to a block schedule, but in our current space, we've been in a 9-period day, which is the hustle and bustle of moving from class to class every 42 minutes. We have a crossroad, 2 hallways intersect in our current high school, and the kids call it the meat grinder, because it's just like a mosh pit of trying to go from one class to another. So as we think about moving into this new space, we're thinking about all of those things. Do we need little yellow passes for students to walk around to sort of identify that they have permission to go from place to place? Or can we begin from a stance of trust and care and shared accountability? We have also thought a lot about the ways in which we've got the whole community excited about this new building, and that just opens up new partnerships. I'll give you one quick example. Our high school students are celebrating, Stamp Out Hunger Day, and they went to our second grades to talk with our second graders who are now in their unit of study called Change Makers, how, social movements progress. So our second graders are going to make posters, lawn signs that will, incentivize people to put food out on the Stamp Out Hunger Day. And so it's those kinds of opportunities, our high school students feeling like they're role models and supports for our younger students, the community organizations and agencies kind of partnering with schools to think about meaningful learning, something that really engages students, cognitive abilities, but also their hearts in what they're doing.
That sounds wonderful. They must be super excited about moving into their new school soon, I'm sure, as well. Yeah, that's great. So Neema, I know that you've sort of taken different approaches within your own classroom, sort of picking up on some of what Kimberly said, this agency for students and so forth, and helping them to have this deeper learning and making the learning, really meaningful for them. I just wondered if you might be to share some of your own practices and some of your own experiences that might, help others in this journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the most powerful learning experiences I was a part of with young people was I taught a unit on the history of race and racism in America. And as the culminating assessment for that unit, I asked students to think about what it would look like to memorialize hard history. So could you take an idea or a moment from that history and create a monument that forced people to reckon with it? And I am not an artist in any way, shape, or form. I can't draw a stick person properly. But I got a bunch of cardboard and scissors and hot glue guns and spray paint. And I said to kids, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I think that you're going to find a way through this. And I trust you. And I know that you've been thinking about this content for a long time. And the resulting projects were incredible. Conceptual in ways that I could never have conceived of, creative in ways that were really powerful. I mean, kids had so much agency in terms of thinking about what is the thing I want to commemorate? How do I want to make this? What do I want to bring into it? And I think it really went to what Kimberly was saying, which is when we start from an assumption of trust and we start with the belief that you can do this, we can do this together. That is what it means to acknowledge people's full humanity, right? You're saying, I see you as a full person and I know that we can do this and move through this together. But it was the least prescriptive thing I ever did. It was the most open-ended and most sort of release responsibility. I mean, hot glue guns in a middle school classroom and X-Acto knives and all these things that people would be don't do that, don't do right. When we assume that children aren't trustworthy, we don't do any of those things. I was putting all those things out there and the results were just completely transformative. Adults left the exhibit crying, that kind of transformative, right? But it is the opposite of what we see happening so much in schools now, where there is this real fixation on prescribed curriculum and on moving through it in this breakneck pace. And there's not room for teachers or students to operate from a place of trust. It's actually distrust that's driving so much of the dominant narrative around schools right now. And I think that when we're in that culture of distrust, it makes it very hard for people to be full people.
Mm-hmm. Joel, that sort of culture of distrust. I mean, I was thinking about, some in our audience will know that you co-authored a book with Sarah Fine, In Search of Deeper Learning. And you're now working, I know, on a new book, which is going to explore a more humane approach to school reform. So from that lens, what tips do you have that you might be able to share to help all students thrive at school?
Well, I think what Neema was last saying is really hitting on it, that the problems are sort of fractal in both a good way and a bad way. So the bad way is the principal distrusts the teachers and the district distrust the principals and the state distrusts the districts and the feds distrust the states. And really we want the sort of the inverse world where we start with the teachers trusting the students and the principals trusting the teachers and so on all the way up. So I think kind of at a pretty kind of deep fundamental level, if we wanted to do the sort of the meta thing, we would say education is governed by this almost Cartesian idea that somebody can spell out the outcomes of exactly where things are going, and then we'll sort of plot it out moment by moment by moment. And we'll make sure that teachers are sort of doing exactly those things and students are learning exactly those things. And that's just really counter to the way in which people learn things. People learn things in fits and starts, in uneven and unpredictable ways. They learn by being in social communities, in relationships with people, working on things that they find purposeful and meaningful. So at a really broad level, the argument of the new book I'm working on is that the kind of the fundamental assumptions that we have, which are derived from physics and economics and a sort of input output principal agent view of the world, are really just like not the right set of assumptions for learning. And right set of assumptions for learning come from psychology, developmental science, sociology. Things that make schools tick are things like culture, trust, social capital, all those sorts of characteristics. And that we really, most of the models we have of schools were developed by men. Most of the administrators of schools are men. Most teachers are women. Most writing about schools has been done by folks who are white. Most students in schools are now students of color. So just on many, many different dimensions, we need kind of an inversion of the way in which we've typically seen things.
Mm-hmm. And Kimberly, how does that sort of resonate with you and what you're doing there in Connecticut in your district?
It really makes me think about how important it is to know who you are as an organization and to develop that sense of who are we collaboratively with all the members of the learning organization. So for many years, we've had a set of core beliefs that really tell the community, the public, the world, and ourselves, like, who are we? Who works here in this organization? We're people who believe what? So we have 6 statements that end with the word matters, like equity matters, and our actions matter, and well-being matters. So those kinds of things, and they just can't live on paper. They have to be how you make good decisions. You have to come back, take them out. Well, if we did that, I'm not sure that would be equitable for all kids. So I don't think we can go forward with that idea. So we try very hard to live by our core beliefs. And when you have a set of shared commitments like that, I think it helps to build that sense of trust and community. We have a very clear, I think many districts have a vision of the graduate or some sort of profile of a graduate, and we have that as well. We've had one for 15 years. Again, that helps us, these sort of grounding documents about who we are, what we believe in, what we're trying to do, help when there's pushback, when there's conflict, when there's disagreement. We can come back to, well, like, what are we really trying to do here? And how can we kind of recenter ourselves around our mission, our vision, and our strong set of beliefs?
Mm-hmm. Neema, I wonder if you could speak to that in your experience in schooling as well. If there's been a sort of a sense of getting everyone on board with this idea. I guess sometimes I'm sure there must be mistrust between teachers and central office. Might sound easier than it can be, I'm sure, at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is identity work, right? And there's very little space for doing identity work in schools with adults. But like everything we're doing in schools is related to how we were schooled. And many times it's so automated, we don't even think about why we're doing it. We are just doing it because it was done to us, because it's our understanding of what schooling is. And it's just sort of like a fact, right? It's not interrogated. It's not questioned. There's never an opportunity to be like, does this work now? Is this serving us? And there's the pace at which school moves doesn't allow for the kind of conversations that would need to happen to even surface. Well, like, why do you think what you think? Where is that coming from? Your ideas around punishment, where do they come from? That is a conversation we should be having in every school. And I don't think any school gets to have it in the way that you'd need to, because there's no space and because it's really hard and it requires a lot of skills. And there's not necessarily the skill set in the building to help people move through those conversations. In my work with teachers now, I found Carla Shalaby's work to be really helpful. She's a former Harvard doctoral student. She's at the University of Michigan now, and she recently wrote an article for ASCD that was called "Are We Teaching Care or Control in Our Schools?" And I found that framing, which is very simple, to be really effective in working with my educators, which is just to say, this thing that we're doing right now, what's under it? Is what's under it care, or is what's under it control? And it's not always binary. Sometimes we can say, well, there's a little bit of both. But like, if we really think about it, can we find a way to reframe from a place of care, or does this thing just need to go because it's just about control? Using that lens with teachers, and also having them use that lens with students, and having students walk around their school building and think about the question of, is this element of schooling about care or control? I think that is very simple and clear framing, but that is actually very powerful, because in spaces that are rooted in care, those are spaces that are about treating people as full human beings. And when we look at spaces that are grounded in control, there are a lot of racialized and class-based narratives in our country about why schooling has control at its core. So that's just that framing, I think, has been a really helpful tool for me in supporting educators.
Thank you for sharing that. Very good.
And if I could,
Joel, go ahead.
Build briefly on what Neema said. I mean, one of the questions that we've been investigating with the districts is, districts are very much creatures of control, and I think people see that as part of doing their job responsibly. Like, if they didn't control things, then they would feel like they were, just throwing, pickup sticks in the air and letting them fall where they may. And so what we've really been trying to explore with the help of places like Farmington is, what does it look like to move something in a direction in a way that feels like that has some open-endedness to it and creates a lot of opportunity for agency and people to take things in the direction that makes sense to them, closer to the ground. But still, if we're going to transform an industrial learning structure into places of, modern learning organizations with passion and purpose, like, you're going to need some substantial leadership. Like, somebody's going to need to get up and say, the structures we've inherited aren't the structures that are serving our kids, particularly our kids of color. We're going to need different structures. And then they're going to need to invite a lot of other people, students, parents, teachers, principals, to join them in that journey, and to think about, like, well, what does that mean in a vocational class? What does it mean in a first grade class? What does it mean in a Socratic seminar? And so forth. So we've been trying to think about how to get this kind of balance between, really strong, values-driven leadership and an opportunity for people who are on the ground to have a lot of agency to shape things.
I'd love to take a moment to put a few questions to you all from our audience. And one question I think I'll ask you, Kimberly, to help us with. Someone in the audience asks, let me pull it up. How are you bringing stakeholders in the community along with your vision for human-centered learning, especially those who may be resistant?
I think we're as open and clear and transparent as we can be with our families. Specifically, I'll speak about families as an important stakeholder group, but really we speak about, the partnership between home and school. And so our principals, I mean, we do the typical things. We have an annual survey, and we look closely at those results and use them to guide our school and program development planning. We conduct focus groups with with students, with faculty, with families. Our principals will, if we began implementing the ruler approach to social emotional learning a number of years ago. And so our principals hosted coffee and chat or community conversations in the evening so that families wouldn't need to leave home to kind of engage in this sort of conversation about, what does it mean for my child? What does it look like? What might I start to hear my child talking about? So I think we try very hard to listen to our families and help them understand how they can be more a part of what's going on in school and support that work at home and better understand some of the practices that we know are likely to be different from what they experienced in their own schooling years. But when you have genuine conversations, you really allow for that two-way dialogue. We may have started with some pushback, but we're not seeing really any kind of disagreement with things like student-focused learning or a vision of a global citizen with the, expectation that students learn to become more self-aware as learners and civic-minded contributors. I mean, there are some things that everyone can get behind, and we try to start from that place of, of care, as Neema said, of care and a vision of the future that I think as adults, our families see now, and they want for their children to be successful in their own futures.
Mm-hmm. It's all in the partnership. It sounds like the partnership is very important. Yes, yes. And someone in our audience was asking, for districts and schools with limited resources, are there some small steps that people can start to take towards creating these human-centered environments for their students and staff? Maybe Joel, I don't know if you have some thoughts about that for those with limited resources. Are these things that cost a lot of money, or can you start these tomorrow?
You could definitely start tomorrow. I mean, one of the reasons we picked human schools as a frame is because, a school being human can mean everything from on the deep end, like what are the things about, that I'm wondering about as I am an adolescent and I'm sort of joining this larger world. Like, are those questions getting answered in school? That's like a human school. But a human school is also like, do I have enough time to eat lunch? Can I go to the bathroom? Do I have a chance to connect with my teachers? When Neema and I did some design charrettes during COVID, we asked kids, was there anything actually like better about remote learning than in-school learning? And they said, yeah, like we can go to the bathroom when we need to, we can move around, we don't need, like, there's different positions in which we can study, etc. So I think of human as a very like a wide spectrum. You could be the kind of phenomenal schools that Farmington is trying to produce, but if you're not at that point, I always tell teachers in schools, just find one kid that you're not connecting with and have a real equal conversation about where is this person coming from and what do they care about and how are they experiencing school, and try to take a step that will help that student feel more connected to what's happening in school. And if you do that, it's just a different muscle, a different sensibility, and chances are what you do for that student will be useful for other students, and then the muscle builds and it grows. Neema, you've had a lot of experience with this. What would you say?
Yeah, I would just say I would extend that also to like find a colleague who you butt heads with and try to take a minute to say, all right, can we like go have, dinner after work, or can we sit down for a little bit and just like not talk about work, but like know who each other are as humans. And similarly, if you're a school leader, can you do that with your educators in a way that isn't about what's happening in your classroom right now, but like I'm actually trying to understand who you are as a person. Again, like the way schools are structured, they don't inherently lend themselves to any of that relational work. If you're doing it like while you're walking with a kid in the hallway, or while you're carving out time, or when you're after school. But ultimately, those moves are, they're cost neutral, but they go a long way, right? Like if we want these spaces to be more human, it starts with us being more human with one another. And really what that requires is time. It's just, can we find the time and space to sort of be with one another in a way that is not about the urgency of like all the many priorities that are put on educators, but can we find that the sort of time to be about the urgency of like knowing one another and caring about one another.
Well, our time is rapidly drawing to a close, unfortunately. This has been a fascinating conversation. I feel like we've just begun to scratch the surface of something that is very important and that definitely needs to be discussed. But I know we have provided some initial big ideas and small ideas and actionable insights there, which is what we always try to do. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank our panel, Neema, Avashia, Kimberly, Wynne, and our very own Mehta here at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thank you so much for all the wonderful insights and everything that you shared with us today. And thank you so much to our audience as well for joining us.